I'm the Reverend Valerie Oliver Durant, and I was a graduating senior from Hamilton High School in 1968 when Dr. King was killed. And even today, 46 years later, it is still difficult to accept that Dr. King was assassinated at the Lorraine Hotel in Memphis, Tennessee, located 1 mile from my home. This one tragic incident transformed my life forever. It placed me at the heart of the civil rights movement as a college student, and for sure, prayer was at the center of our college-focused civil rights work. To set the tone for today's remembrance, I would like to read for you a brief excerpt from a book written by Mrs. Coretta Scott King. Many of you may not have known, but she was an author of many books, and this particular one is called Standing in the Need of Prayer. And Mrs. King said, "Prayer was a wellspring of strength and inspiration during the civil rights movement. Throughout the movement, we prayed for victory in our nonviolent protests, for brotherhood and sisterhood, and among the people of all races, for reconciliation and the fulfillment of the beloved community." My husband, Martin Luther King Jr., prayer was a daily source of courage and strength that gave him the ability to carry out even during the darkest hours of our struggle. I remember one very difficult day when he came home bone weary from the stress that comes with the leadership of the Montgomery bus boycott. And in the middle of the night, he was awakened by the threatening and abusive phone call, one of many we received throughout the movement. But on this particular occasion, however, Martin had had enough. After that call, he got up from the bed and made himself some coffee, and he began to worry about his family, and all the burdens that come with the movement weighed heavily on his soul. And with his head in his hand, Martin bowed over the kitchen table and prayed out loud, "Lord, I'm taking a stand for what I believe is right. The people are looking at me for leadership, and if I stand before them without strength and courage, they will falter. I am at the end of my prayers. I'm at the end of my powers, and I have nothing left. I've come to the point where I can't face it alone." Later, he told me at that moment, I experienced the divine as I had never experienced it before. He seemed as though he could hear a voice saying, "Stand up for righteousness, stand up for truth, and God would be at our side forever." When Martin stood up from the table, he was imbued with a new sense of confidence, and he was ready to face any and everything. Let us pray. Creator and the lover of the universe, who has summoned women, men, children throughout the ages to be thy witness and sometimes martyrs for thee, we celebrate this day in remembrance and thanksgiving for the life and legacy of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. We're grateful for his time among us and his words and deeds, and for the quality of his living witness, which eases the pain somewhat of recalling the brevity of his years. We rejoice in his example of obedient faith journeys, and we thank you for this day, for strength, steadfastness, and courage. In the name of all that is loving, peace invoking, justice enduring, we pray for peace everywhere. One Brooklyn.
Thank you, Reverend. Hello, everybody. I'm Rabbi Linda Henry Goodman from Union Temple of Brooklyn, and I also bring, as its president, I also bring greetings from the New York Board of Rabbis. And we read in Scripture, "And God took dust from the four corners of the earth and made human beings so that no one of us could say, 'My skin color is better than yours.' And God formed human beings in God's image. Male and female, God created them, and God blessed them. We're here today in this wonderful hall, which stands as a testament to the creative impulse within us, implanted within us by God. That is the spark of inspiration, of ideas, of vision. Martin ignited that spark. He pushed us to do better because he believed in our capacity as human beings created in the image of God. He challenged us to use our vision and creativity to make of this a better world, the kind of world that God had intended for us. Martin pushed us because he loved us, because he believed in our capacity to improve, not to be content with society in which some of God's children are left behind. He pushed us to gain respect and humility. He demanded of us fairness and compassion. He pushed us to root out prejudice and inequality, to root out disease and poverty, to pursue justice and freedom for all of God's children. He pushed us to use our intelligence and our strength, the sensitivity and compassion that are implanted in our souls as children of the Creator of all humanity. He pushed us because he loved us, because he was our brother. And now we pray for strength to realize our capacity to act, to move forward, to work for a just and compassionate society, so that justice will roll down like waters and righteousness as a mighty stream. But we know that prayer is not enough. We must work together, buoyed and inspired by our brother Martin, who to his last breath on this earth worked to realize the vision and potential that exists within all of us. This is our prayer. As we bless the memory of Martin Luther King, may we feel his gentle but firm hand at our back, pushing us to move forward as he knew we could. Then his memory will truly be for blessing. And we remember the words of Moses, Chazak ve'amatz, be strong and of good courage.
And we're also so very, very, very honored to welcome Mayor Bill de Blasio, Speaker Melissa Mark Viverito, our event co-host, the new Brooklyn Borough President Eric Adams, Brooklyn District Attorney Ken Adams is with us today. And I know you'll join all of us in wishing all of them well as we begin, Ken Thompson, I apologize. I was trying to go quickly. And we wish all of them well as they begin their journey at leading us through the next several years.
You know, I said this last night, and I want to continue to say it as I move throughout the borough, that you don't applaud me, I applaud you. I am not to be served, I'm to serve. It was right here in the 88th precinct where I was a lieutenant, and I watched this community develop as I patrolled. It's a different feeling in spirit when you wore a bulletproof vest and stood on street corners protecting children and families. It's a different energy. And I know in a very real way that we've lost a lot of Dr. Kings with the bullets that have carved highways of death through our community. I'm excited about the newly arrival of Commissioner Bratton and his team as we start the process of ensuring that our children can live safe without being in disgrace. That's the energy. And so I want to say to you in a very short period, because it doesn't take a lot to say how much I love you, I adore you, and this is one borough, one Brooklyn, and Galileo got it wrong. Earth is not the center of the universe, Brooklyn is. And it is a Shakespearean tragedy for those who have to live outside the boundaries of this beautiful borough. And I know some of you are going through separation anxiety that you lost Marty Markowitz, but Eric Adams is your borough president now. I will never be able to fill his shoes, but I'm bringing my own pair, and I'm going to walk a great distance. Brooklyn is a great place. Great things are happening. But the popularity of the brand must turn into prosperity for all Brooklynites. We cannot leave anyone behind. So let's get ready. I want all of you to sign up and join Team One Brooklyn as we turn this borough into what not it is, but what it ought to be. And there's an exciting period for us. Thank you, Brooklyn. Thank you. I want to bring on our great senior senator who lives in Brooklyn, Senator Charles Schumer.
Following up on our borough president's remarks, I am the first senator from Brooklyn in 180 years. And let me say why. So many reasons. What a great man he was. And one of the reasons he was great is he took on his broad shoulders with his strength and conviction and held a giant mirror up to America. He forced America to look into that mirror and see what was actually going on. And when he forced America's eyes to gaze into that mirror, they didn't like what they saw and they began to change. Now, Dr. King, if he were here today, would still be holding up that mirror. And what would he be telling us to do? He'd be telling us to pass unemployment benefits in Washington so those who need work and look for work don't have to give up their home or their car while they're looking. So, we miss him, we admire him, we revere him. And I want to conclude with something I do here every year. Dr. King was not only one of the greatest Americans who ever existed, one of the greatest men who existed on the face of the earth, but he was also one of the greatest writers America has ever had. He was a brilliant writer and a brilliant man. And you should just read his writings if you get a chance. I, every so often, not just on MLK Day, take out his famous letter from a Birmingham jail. What happened then, as you may remember, Dr. King was protesting and picketing and doing everything in a nonviolent way to try and get Birmingham to end segregation. In the name of Dr. Martin Luther King, let us not wait. Let us move forward and make progress that he would admire in this great country of ours. God bless you all.
Thank you so much. And waiting and also include making sure we have equality for our women. 52% of this borough are women, and we must make sure that they have the equality they deserve. Another half of our senatorial team is Senator Gillibrand. Senator Gillibrand.
Thank you to Borough President Adams for his leadership, his commitment, his absolute steadfastness in fighting for all of Brooklyn. I'm grateful for everyone here today to celebrate the life and the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. We have to teach the next generation what this man did, how he lived his life, why he fought so hard for justice and equality. So last night I made dinner for my family, and I'm sitting around the table with my husband and my 10-year-old Theo and my 5-year-old Henry. And I was explaining how I was going to work today, and they had the day off. And I said to Henry, the 5-year-old, do you know who Dr. Martin Luther King is and why we celebrate him? And he said, yes, Mommy, yes, I do. I said, well, tell me, why do we celebrate his legacy? He said, because Dr. Martin Luther King believed that everyone should be treated fairly. I said, that's right, Henry, that's exactly right. And I said, what else do you know about him? And he said, oh, Mommy, I know that the reason why he was so successful is because he used his words. And I thought, exactly right, Henry. That was his way of saying nonviolent marching, etc. So I turned to my 10-year-old and said, Theo, what do you think of Henry's answer? And he said, Mommy, he's exactly right. And he said, did you know that Dr. Martin Luther King is the only leader who has a memorial and a statue in Washington, D.C., who was not a president? I said, I didn't know that, Theo. Thank you for telling me. So my sons are the next generation. That is why we celebrate Dr. Martin Luther King's legacy. And I can tell you, as Senator Schumer said, his words are truer now than they actually ever were. The struggles that our communities are facing are often more invasive and more corrosive than ever before. And I can tell you, as I've traveled all around our state, people really are struggling. The differences between the haves and the have-nots has grown so far. Families who are working hard are struggling harder than they've ever struggled before. Even Senator Schumer noted, President Obama is fighting for this basic level of fairness, the basics of giving families the chance to survive. So when Dr. King says, let us rise up tonight with greater readiness, let us stand together with greater determination, and let us move on in these powerful days, these days of challenge to make America what it ought to be. We have the opportunity to make America a better nation. He meant it. And so that is our call to action, and all of us must fight for a stronger America. Thank you, and God bless.
Clearly, the prerequisite for prosperity is public safety, and we are happy to have here the person in charge of public safety in the city of New York, Police Commissioner Bill Bratton.
Like many of the speakers before you this morning, I have a favorite Martin Luther King quote that I'd like to share with you, and it will frame my very brief remarks before Mayor Bill de Blasio comes before you. And this quote, this section of it, was written while he was in jail in Birmingham. He had come from Atlanta to participate in the demonstrations in Birmingham, the very brutal police repression of people of color in that city, with the fire hoses and the dogs and all the violence directed against them as they fought for their civil rights. And in that jail cell, he wrote, I cannot sit idly by in Atlanta and not be concerned about what happens in Birmingham. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We are caught, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. Mr. King clearly understood that in this country, in the greatest democracy the world has ever known, that what this democracy promises clearly was not being delivered to people of color. Our democracy is based first and foremost on public safety. Without it, all the other pillars of education, freedom of speech, health care, all those pillars are on an infirm foundation, a foundation that is shaky. Mayor Bill de Blasio and I, as your newly appointed police commissioner, are committed to living up to the ideals of democracy as Mr. King understood them, that they have to apply to everybody, not to some of the time, but to all of the time. We are in very interesting times. Crime is down dramatically, fortunately. But for so many in this city, it has come not with a benefit, but at a cost. And certainly in many of the communities of color, many of you in this audience, don't feel that all that should have come about with that reduction in crime, the benefits, are not shared by all. And Martin Luther King understood that if all did not feel the benefit, then we needed to work harder to make sure that they would. So to that end, Mayor Bill de Blasio, who will be on just after I get done, we have committed to the idea of reform of the issue of stop, question, and frisk that was felt by so many, particularly in communities of color, to have been unfairly applied in excess numbers. The mayor and I are committed to constitutional policing, that you cannot break the law to enforce it. We are committed to respectful policing. You get what you give. And we are committed to compassionate policing. All these are the ideals of Martin Luther King that he strived for and that he ultimately gave his life for. It will not be easy. Things worth having are never easy to achieve. He understood that. But he was the embodiment of, if you wanted to create change, you must become the change. I am committed to the dream of Mayor de Blasio that we can, in fact, have change that benefits everybody in the city of New York. And as police commissioner of this great department, your police department, we will work together. We will work seamlessly so that there are no loose threads that threaten to unbind the garment that Martin Luther King talked about. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I was right. First, I want to thank all the volunteers that are here. You know, volunteering and giving back is so important. Let's give them a hand. I want to now bring on the leader of the city of New York, and she happens to be married to the mayor, Charlene and Mayor Bill de Blasio.
Love you back. Hello, Brooklyn. Thank you. Thank you for that tremendous welcome. It's an honor to be on this grand stage for this wonderful celebration. You can clap.
Don't hold back.
Right? And it's especially moving to be here this year. Dr. King said, human progress never rolls in on wheels of inevitability. It comes through tireless efforts and persistent work. Well, we've done some work. Yes, we did. Yes, we did. The spirit of Dr. King's teachings are alive in City Hall. And we're going to honor what he once said, that as long as there is poverty, no one can be totally rich. With your continued help and support and your prayers and with leadership from Mayor de Blasio, we're going to make this city, this great city, one city. Not one simply for the well-to-do and fortunate, but a city for all. And by doing that, New York will be a city worthy of Dr. King's memory. Isn't that right, Mayor de Blasio?
Well, First Lady, as I said lately, you know, in public it's okay. I just don't like when she makes me call her First Lady at home. It's such an honor to be at this celebration, which is really, to me, one of the things each year where we really get in touch with what we're all here to do on this earth. And BAM epitomizes that by its very being. And I just want to thank everyone at BAM for what they do for this borough and this city. All of the great leaders today, Senator Schumer, Senator Gillibrand, Congressman Jeffries, our new council speaker, a great progressive change agent, Melissa Mark Viverito. We're so glad that she is leading the city council. Our district attorney, Kim Thompson, our police commissioner, Bill Bratton, and I think what he said was powerful about the changes that we need to make to bring police and community together in the city, and I commend and thank Commissioner Bratton for his words today. And of course, our Borough President Eric Adams, who makes us all proud to be Brooklynites. And this great annual celebration honors our nation's greatest apostle of freedom and social and economic justice, the greatest voice to emerge in this nation's history, to show us a path that, in fact, our nation has been all about, but has not ever fully realized. Now, Dr. King would have turned 85 last Wednesday. And if I know it's amazing to think he could be still here among us if it were not for an assassin's bullet. And if he had lived, there's no telling the extraordinary things he could have said and done. But this much is certain, his message is alive today. His message is alive in this room. His message was alive in the people of this city a few months ago when they made sure we had a government that looked like New York City and chose Eric Adams as our borough president. Chose José James as our public advocate. And the government that you have elected is a profoundly progressive one that believes in the values of Dr. King. We feel it deeply. We want to live those values out every day. And this government together will start the work of changing our city, just as if Dr. King were on this stage, pushing us to do more, reminding us, being a conscience. We have to live as if he were sitting here with us, reminding us of the right path. Now, 50 years ago, 1964, Dr. King wrote a book with this simple title, Why We Can't Wait. And the statement says it all, because we know justice delayed, then as now, is justice denied. Dr. King knew that. He coined that powerful phrase that we associate now with President Obama, the fierce urgency of now. It's a phrase that tells us a lot. Dr. King lived it, and we have to live it. And there are so many obvious examples today of why we can't wait in our time. We can't wait because the crisis of inequality has deepened, and it is closing doors for hardworking people in this city and all over this country. And it's a crisis that we have to address head on. We have a city sadly divided between those with opportunity and with the means to fully partake of that opportunity, and those whose dreams of a better life are being deferred again and again. And that is not the New York that we signed up for. It's not the New York we want to live in, where some can see a bright future and others simply can't find it. So Dr. King would tell us we can't wait. The time to act is now. The time to build shared prosperity is now. Now is the time to do the things that we can do to reach people in need. Now is the time to extend paid sick days to hundreds of thousands of hardworking New Yorkers. It's a basic act of giving people a little more stability and security in their lives, and it's something that we are already setting in motion in this city right now. Now is the time to protect community health care. And in this last decade, we've watched it slip away again and again all over the 5 boroughs, but we're not going to let it keep slipping away. We're going to stand and fight. We're going to stand and fight for interfaith. We're going to stand and fight for Long Island College Hospital. And, you know, sometimes you watch the news and you see very dire reports about our hospitals, and I don't blame anyone who might believe those reports after what we've seen in the last decade. But we've seen it again and again at Interfaith. We've seen it again and again at Long Island College Hospital. It ain't over till it's over. And this administration is committed to making sure that every neighborhood has the health care it needs. Now is the time, and I want to echo the comments of Commissioner Bratton, now is the time to reform a broken stop and frisk policy. And yes, we do it to protect the rights and dignity of young men of color who are our future. We also do it to give police officers the community partnership they need in order to keep crime down and keep communities safe. Now, here's a personal favorite of Charlene's and mine. Now is the time to make sure that every child gets full-day pre-K, that it is a universal right in this town. And that every middle school child has a guarantee of after school so they're safe and secure and learning more every day. I don't doubt for a moment if we had the honor, if we could feel the presence of Dr. King sitting here amongst us, he would believe that these are the things our society requires. And I'll finish with this. You know, Dr. King wrote another book. It was the last one he wrote, published just before his death. And its title posed this simple question: where do we go from here? Chaos or community? The title is just as pertinent today. But now it's up to us. It's up to us to actually answer the question, to put it into motion, to put it into action. And I think I can speak for everyone in this room and say, we choose the path of community. We choose to not leave any New Yorker behind. This will be one city where everyone rises together. Let's not wait. Let's do it now. Thank you, and God bless you.
Brooklyn in the house right now? Y'all having a good time celebrating the life of Dr. King? It's an honor and a privilege to be with you on today, and we are certainly so thankful for BAM and Medgar College and our new Borough President Eric Adams. He used to wear a blue uniform, now he wears a blue suit, but he's always been a drum major for justice. And so we're thankful for him. I have had the opportunity to represent you in many neighborhoods throughout Brooklyn, down in the United States Congress. And one of the things that's been so interesting for me, when I first got there, being a child of Central Brooklyn, I've got to confess on this King Day, I was just so excited to have the opportunity to represent you. I was tempted to go down to the floor of the House of Representatives, stand in front of the microphone, and simply say, holla. But you know, I thought about that, and I said, if I did it, I might just hear the voice of Dr. King calling down from heaven, saying, young man, we sent you down to the Congress
to stand up. So don't go down there and act up. And certainly, your congressional delegation, we're going to continue to do all that we can to stand up for the education of our children. Stand up for our seniors. Stand up for affordable housing. Stand up for our civil rights, and continue to stand up for our president, Barack Obama. Now, as I close, Dr. King once made the observation that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. And I think what Dr. King was saying is that in this world, we've got some good folks, and we got some rough folks. And in Washington, I see that every day. But in order for progress to be made, all you really need is a few good folks to work hard, sacrifice, dedicate themselves to the cause of making a difference, and at the end of the day, justice will prevail. And so today we celebrate the life of Dr. King. Tomorrow, let's continue to march forward toward completing his dream. And one of the people that's been involved in that struggle for justice, for economic equality, against the prison industrial complex, like Nelson Mandela, she's one of our freedom fighters. I present to you Angela Davis.
Thank you very much. I'd really like to thank the Brooklyn Academy of Music and Medgar Evers College for having invited me to participate in this wonderful celebration of the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And I cannot tell you how happy I am to be in Brooklyn this morning. Many years ago, I lived in Bed-Stuy when I was in high school here. And those were some of the most memorable years of my life. So it is really wonderful to be in Brooklyn this morning, especially since the election of the new mayor of New York. Martin Luther King should represent in our historical imagination not a single individual, but rather the vast numbers of women and men of the last century who were not afraid to stand up and struggle for a future defined by our quest for collective freedom. He should also represent those of us who want to carry on that legacy of building communities of struggle that will expand the possibilities of freedom. And let me say that it is important to recognize that the creation of this holiday, MLK Day, was not the result of an edict from above, but rather it was the outcome of persistent struggle from the immediate aftermath of Dr. King's assassination in April 1968 until the holiday began to be observed in 1986. So let us not forget that bills were presented in Congress by John Conyers and then by Shirley Chisholm. Shirley Chisholm. Talking about Brooklyn. And then we demonstrated for this holiday. We marched, we signed petitions, and Stevie Wonder composed and recorded a happy birthday song for Dr. King, which in many of our communities has displaced the conventional happy birthday song. The point that I'm making here is that vast histories of activism have enabled us to come together this morning and extend our discussion of activism in the cause of freedom. One of the great advantages of having a period during which we can meditate on the legacies of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. is that we get to think deeply about the meaning of freedom, about how far we have moved in the direction of its attainment, about how far we still have to go, or even whether it makes sense to think about freedom in such quantitative terms. We get to think about freedom not only for Black people, but also for indigenous people, for Latinos, for Asian Americans, for Muslim Americans. We get to think about human rights for LGBT communities, about liberties for disabled people. We get to think about an end to anti-Semitism and militarism and violence. We get to think about food justice, and we get to think about the environment. We also know that we cannot think about freedom without evoking the institutionalized deprivations of freedom like slavery and Jim Crow and apartheid and the prison industrial complex. It has taken a very long time to encourage serious discussion about slavery. Slavery existed in this country from 1619 until, they say, 1865. So even if we are willing to say that slavery was abolished in 1865, which it wasn't really, from 1865 to 2014 is only 149 years. From 1619 to 1865 is 246 years. This means that the overwhelming majority of this country's history has been a history of slavery. Now, Bob Moses, whom some of you know, a major movement leader during the Civil Rights era, he often talks about what he calls the dark side of America. And he says that we would be much better off if we could see and taste the dark side of America. But we are encouraged to ignore and forget. And that is why we still live with the ghost of slavery. That is why this country as a whole does not see the great racial disparities in incarceration and education as major travesties. That is why we cannot understand the logic of the structural racism that persists. And so we cannot celebrate Dr. King's birthday and pretend that the struggles we associate with him can be relegated to the past. We cannot accept the simplistic narratives of victory that are so often evoked in connection with Dr. King. We cannot afford to believe that we inhabit a post-racial society. In fact, racism is more entrenched in the economic, social, political, educational, correctional structures of this country than ever before in our history. We have learned important messages about the persistence of racism on this planet from Nelson Mandela. Mandela was an extraordinary freedom fighter for many reasons, but perhaps most of all for his humility and for his unrelenting insistence on community and on collective agency. When he was asked how he wanted to be remembered, he always said he wanted to be remembered as one of the many other men and women who contributed to our ongoing struggles for freedom. Mandela is often portrayed as one who was simply willing to forgive and forget. his relationship with de Klerk, who was, of course, the head of the apartheid government, his friendship with a guard during the time he was in prison on Robben Island, who was eventually invited to attend his wedding to Graça Machel. Having spoken about three powerful figures whom we celebrate for their amazing lives and work, let me pose the question about how we move from the heroic individual to ordinary people, who are the ones who always do the real work of demanding the transformation of society. Regimes of racial segregation were not disestablished in the U.S. primarily because of the work of legislators or leaders or presidents, but rather because ordinary people adopted a critical stance in the way they perceived their relationship to reality. Apartheid was not dismantled from above. Slavery was not legally abolished because political leaders felt like passing the 13th Amendment. Social realities that might have appeared inalterable, impenetrable, came to be viewed as malleable, as transformable, and people learned how to imagine what it might mean to live in a world that was not so exclusively governed by the principle of white supremacy. And this collective consciousness, this collective imagination of ordinary people emerged always within the context of political struggles. Now, it has been argued that the very concept of freedom, which has inspired so many world historical revolutions, that concept of freedom must have been first imagined by slaves. We know that the only non-racial democracy in the world was created not by the United States of America, not by France, but rather by Toussaint de Louverture and people of African descent who had been enslaved in Haiti. I am so happy that a film like 12 Years a Slave has been so widely distributed and has been nominated for an Oscar. But I'm also disturbed that it has taken so long. It has taken so long. We can count the number of films on slavery on one or at the most two hands. And I'm also a bit disturbed that while I love the film, it seems that the main character of this wonderful film could only be a free person of color who was kidnapped into slavery, as if it was his prior freedom that invited us to identify so powerfully with Solomon Northup. What if he had always been a slave? What if he had never been offered the opportunity to learn how to read or write? What if he had been a woman? And why, perhaps with the exception of the character played by Alfre Woodard, who's absolutely amazing in that film, and she plays the wife of a slaveholder. But why are all of the other women only portrayed as suffering beings without agency of their own? 12 Years a Slave has been praised for presenting on screen for the first time something that we might call the realities of slavery, slave subjectivities with which we might identify. But I want us to remember that the surge of black women writers in the last couple of decades of the 20th century was fueled by the desire to have us understand what it might mean to be a slave. Subjectivities under slavery, both resistant subjectivities and defeated subjectivities. And so I mentioned interventions by black women writers like Toni Morrison and Toni Cade Bambara and Gail Jones, and also musicians like Nina Simone. And I I do this because it is still extremely important for us to resist the imposition of masculinist ideologies. 21st century activism in the cause of freedom. In the cause of freedom calls for a feminist approach. I have devoted much of my life to a struggle we call prison abolition, which follows from the abolition struggle in the mid-20th century that focused on legal segregation, which in turn follows from the 19th century abolitionist struggles that focused on slavery. Bringing feminism within an abolitionist frame and vice versa, bringing abolition within a feminist frame, means that we take seriously the feminist adage that the personal is political. The personal is political. And let me say that there is what we might call a deep relationality that links struggles against institutions and struggles to reinvent our personal lives and recraft ourselves. We know, for example, that we replicate the structures of retributive punishment in our own emotional responses. Someone attacks us, verbally or otherwise, and what is our response? A counterattack. The retributive impulse of state punishment is inscribed in our own emotional responses. This is a feminist insight regarding the reproduction of the relations that enable something like the prison industrial complex. The legal scholar Michelle Alexander points out that mass incarceration inside the U.S. constitutes what she calls a new Jim Crow. She points out that there are more black men in prison and under the authority of correctional agencies today than were enslaved in 1850. If we are not afraid to speak out against governments and presidents and corporations, no matter how powerful they may be. In the 1950s and the 1960s, Dr. Martin Luther King was called a communist by those who thought that the best that communists deserved was death. In the 1960s, 1970s, and 1980s, Nelson Mandela was called a terrorist, and he was not taken off the U.S. terrorist list until 2008. That is to say, each time he visited the U.S., an exception had to be made. Today, we celebrate these two figures as indicative of what our future holds for us, and their adversaries have proven to be on the wrong side of history. Finally, let me say that I cannot guarantee that we will fully achieve the social justice goals for which we are now passionate advocates. But I can guarantee you that if we commit ourselves to struggle for a better, more ethical, more egalitarian world, the planet will definitely become a more hospitable place, not only for humans, but for all of the other species with which we share the earth. Thank you very much.
Our fathers